welcome to, this channel's first video. My name is Laurie, and this is going to be my personal book club. Specifically, a book club for the extreme horror genre. That being books with excessive violence, gore, depravity, that sort of stuff. Thanks to a couple of specific iceberg videos, you might have heard of the extreme horror film genre before. Stuff like Serbian films, Slaughtered Vomit Dolls, August Underground, that sort of gore trash stuff. Well, horror literature also has a genre like that. It's generally referred to as extreme horror or splatterpunk, and much like extreme horror films, I'm guessing that there's a fair few people who are sort of morbidly interested in what these books are about, but don't really have the tolerance for gore to read them. And I understand that, because there is some really, really messed up stuff in these books that is hard to get through. But that's why I'm starting this channel, to give people an idea of what the genre is like, and maybe even give them a starting off point to jump into the world of splatterpunk. Every week I'll be reading and reviewing an extreme horror book. In this bag, I've got about 50 or so extreme horror titles, mostly picked from the subreddits r/horrorlit and r/extremehorrorlit. And every week, I'll be picking a title out of the bag and reading it. Obviously, I'm not just limited to the stuff in here. If you ever have any suggestions on what books you'd like to read, please just toss it in the comments below. To start off this channel, I thought that it's only fitting we review probably one of the most iconic extreme horror books. So without further ado, here is The Girl Next Door. So The Girl Next Door, written by the late Jack Ketchum, is probably one of the more mainstream extreme horror books, and I don't mean that it's tamer than others, it's just more well known. If you've heard of this book, or the movie it was eventually adapted to before, then you'll probably know about it because of what it's based off of, the case of Sylvia Likens. Now, I'm not going to get into the Likens case right now, or get into the details of it, because I'm not a true crime channel. But if you want to check out a full rundown, then Shrouded Hand has done a really, really good informative video on it, which I will link up there. All you need to know for now is that Sylvia Likens was a teenage girl, I believe she was 16, who was held captive by a woman who was taking care of her, and her sister, and tortured by that woman and that woman's family, and eventually by completely unrelated neighbours. This is obviously a really shocking and disturbing case. Not only because, it involves a 16-year-old girl being tortured to death, but because of the sheer number of people that were involved in Sylvia's death. It really highlights the herd mentality that can form when one person, or a small group of people, are designated as the other, as non-human, as well as the amount of control that adults had over children back in the 60s. And it's these two themes that The Girl Next Door really, really taps into, and what I think it does an excellent job of conveying. Obviously, there are some ethical concerns that come with using a 16-year-old girl's death as inspo for your horror novel. I'm not going to pretend that that's a completely fine thing to do, but at the same time, I can't say that the fact that this is based off of a true story added nothing to the book. There are some sections of it which are already hard to get through, but are made just extremely tough to think about because of the fact that you know it happened. But I will talk about that later on in the video. For now, let's go over the plot. So The Girl Next Door starts with a little monologue from our main character and narrator, David, who describes how his two wives don't know the meaning of pain. Specifically, his second wife apparently had a horrible incident with a feral cat and is permanently scarred from it. And he follows that story by saying, my second wife says that pain. She doesn't know shit, that woman. Which begins the overarching question of this book. Is the main character kind of misogynistic, or is it the author? Which is a question that we're going to be asking ourselves, I think, many, many times during the course of this channel. Because there are a lot of weird, horny dudes who write extreme horror. He then describes how his first wife pretty much saw her former lover skinned alive in a car accident, and how she is closer to the meaning of pain because she's experienced that long-lasting trauma, and knows that pain isn't just a matter of physical hurt, it's a matter of what you see. And there is a fantastic quote here that I'd love to read out to you. "You see it and you take it in, and then it's you. You're host to a long white worm that gnaws and eats, growing, filling your intestines until finally you cough one morning, and up comes the blind pale head of the thing sliding from your mouth like a second tongue." Which I think is an amazing description of trauma. So David continues saying that unlike his wives, he knows pain, and that he's known it for a long time because he was involved in an incident with a bunch of other neighbourhood kids back in 1958, the summer of 1958. He goes on to kind of make excuses, saying that it was a really rocky time for America, that nationwide households were destabilizing. It really sounds like he's trying to convince himself that it wasn't a matter of his particular neighborhood being quote-unquote evil. Instead, it was a nationwide thing, that all over the country what happened at Ruth's house was happening everywhere, because that removes the personal responsibility from what he did. And then we get into the real meat of the story, which is a very long, extended flashback to the summer of 1958 and to what happened to Meg Lachlan. So the story revolves around Meg and Susan Lolan, who are staying at this woman Ruth's house because their parents died in a car accident. Susan is physically disabled because of this accident, and Meg has a very long scar running up her arm. So Ruth is seen by the other kids in the neighbourhood as the cool adult. She lets them drink beer, she lets them smoke. There's a scene where she lets them light a bunch of tent worms, which I believe these worms that just spin a lot of silk in the trees in America. She lets the kids light a bunch of those on fire as a sort of pest control. She is the cool adult. She's the cool friend's mum who allows you to smoke weed. And because of that, all of the kids kind of respect her a lot more than they would other adults. And that's part of the reason why when things start getting really, really bad, none of the kids really do anything. Even David, who pretty much never participates in the actual incident, doesn't go and tell the police or his parents at first because it's Ruth. She's the cool adult. She knows what she's doing. None of them can even imagine the idea that she is completely fucking unhinged. So Meg and David meet by a stream. David is 12, Meg is 14, and David pretty much immediately develops a little crush on her because she's the cool older girl who moved from the big city to this tiny town where, again, everybody knows everybody, so she is an outsider. So he starts to notice that Ruth is acting really weirdly towards Meg and Susan, but mainly Meg. And I feel like that's some sort of internalized disgust Ruth has with herself that she's redirecting at Meg. Because Ruth is a woman in her 30s or 40s, she's divorced, she has 3 kids, she's implied to not be very physically attractive. As a woman in the 60s, she has failed. On the other hand, Meg is young, she's pretty, she's got her whole life ahead of her, and even though she just lost her fucking parents in a car accident, Ruth feels like Meg has it all and she's got nothing. Meg is who Ruth could never be. And so, Ruth begins taking out her own internalized anger on Meg. It starts with her just beating Meg and Susan, but again, mainly Meg. And then it begins escalating with this weird humiliation in front of the other boys. Ruth is pretty much constantly insinuating that Meg is easy, or that she is a slut, despite being a 14-year-old traumatized girl, and she is just constantly trying to humiliate Meg in front of the other boys, make her feel like shit, and starts restricting what Meg can eat and how often she eats because she feels like Meg is too fat. And because all the kids in the neighborhood trust Ruth and they trust Ruth's opinion, they also begin treating Meg shittily because Meg is the outsider. She's okay to treat like that because she's not from around here and she's not part of the in-group. all except for David, who doesn't really participate in the aggression towards Meg, but he also doesn't really stop it. Which is, again, another big theme of the book. The idea of standing by and watching while someone suffers, and whether or not that is equally as bad as actively causing the suffering. So all this culminates in Meg trying to catch the attention of a local police officer in order to try and rescue her and Susan from Ruth's house, because at this point Ruth is regularly abusing them, regularly restricting food, and just altogether being horrible towards them. And obviously this doesn't work. All it does is make Ruth aware that Meg tried to get the police on her, and that makes her completely fucking pissed. And that leads to Meg getting locked in the basement. And there is a fantastic quote here which really ties into the theme of the amount of just helplessness children had when faced with adults. Quote, "Shit, they could dump us in a river if they wanted to. We were just kids. We were property. We belonged to our parents, body and soul. It meant we were doomed in the face of any real danger from the adult world, and that meant hopelessness and humiliation and anger. It was as though in failing herself, Meg had failed us as well. So we turned that anger outward, toward Meg." So Meg getting taken to the basement is pretty much the trigger for this book getting really, really fucked up. Up until that section, I'd been kind of disappointed with the book as a whole, even though I knew that something bad was coming. But the following sections definitely showed why it's in the extreme horror category and earned its reputation through and through. There are some really, really difficult scenes to read. And I would urge you, if you are triggered by any of this stuff, dip out the video, please, because this is some extremely graphic shit. So, the first torture scene we get in the basement is Meg just getting the shit kicked out of her. Ruth's three sons, Woofer, Willie, and Donnie, are all just beating her up and trying to get her to cry, and she refuses to cry. David, again, doesn't intervene and doesn't hurt her. He's just kind of a passive bystander. And all the time, Ruth is there just watching and encouraging it. So before we move on, I have to explain a concept that was introduced earlier on in the book, which is the game, and not the one that you just lost. The game is this game that that David and his group of friends already had before the incident with Meg. Basically, one person would stand watch, and the rest would try and sneak up on them without getting seen and eventually catch them. And once they'd caught them, they could do basically anything they wanted to them. And it's never elaborated on in detail, but it's very much implied that one of the few girls that are already in David's friend group, Denise, who I believe is 10, was once the subject of the capture, and they did some inappropriate things to her when she got captured. I remember there's a specific quote which really shook me when they were talking about the game. "The raid took maybe half an hour. The capture could take all day." So, when David first finds Meg getting the shit kicked out of her in the basement, Ruth basically says, "This is my version of the game." And that is when it becomes a game for all of the other kids in the neighborhood, where it stops becoming torturing a girl and starts becoming a kid's game. Because all of this is facilitated by Ruth. The next torture scene sees Meg being strung up by her arms, like this, and left basically on tiptoes, which is not even that gory, but it's the sort of thing you can just imagine what that would feel like, and you can imagine the pain. And it made my stomach absolutely churn when I realised what was going on. They try to get her to confess, and it's never really elaborated on what they want her to confess. They just want her to say something to confirm the view they have of her, that being that she's a slut, she's a bitch, etc., etc. And then they strip her. Luckily at this point, Ruth has forbidden any of the boys from touching her, because not for her benefit, it's because she says that Meg is dirty and that if any of the boys touch her, they'll catch something. But it's still just awful to think about because Meg is strung up, completely naked, blindfolded, being taunted by a bunch of boys, saying that they can whip her, they can do whatever the fuck they want to her. And Ruth is... Right now they can't actually do that stuff, but Ruth isn't really denying it either. She's just sitting at the back watching Meg and watching her reaction. Later they decide that Meg is dirty because at this point she's being locked in the basement for several days. A couple of those days without any food or water, and she is just in awful condition. She's obviously bruised because of the beatings she's received, and luckily she was let out of that strung up position, but they still put her into it at night. So they decide to clean Meg. They take her upstairs completely naked, and then they run the shower to the hottest setting and then push her in there. And it's said later that she has burns along her back. Which is, again, one of those things where it's not like, oh, and then her guts got ripped out, because that sort of pain is so detached from the reader, because you don't know what the hell that would feel like. But you know what getting scalded by hot water feels like. And so the idea of it scalding your entire body, it really got to me, and I feel like it gets to you too. Over the next few days, Ruth begins to get ill. It's weirdly implied that this torture of Meg, while she's enjoying it, obviously, is making her physically just deprecate. She is described by the end of the book, she looks years older than what she looked like before. And that's, if I recall correctly, that's actually true of the real woman who was involved in the Likens case, Gertrude. She looked unusually old for her age, which is, just another connection to the Likens case. So, Ruth is ill and can't supervise, so the boys start just ignoring the fact that they're not allowed to touch her anymore. And I think at this point, Ruth also doesn't care. So Eddie, who is established earlier on as one of the most violent members of the friend group, which is fucking saying something, Eddie comes over and he kicks things off by drinking a beer and then pissing in Meg's face while she's tied down, which is already just disgusting. Then they waterboard her in soapy water in order to rinse the pee off, and then Eddie drains the sink full of the soapy water, runs it on the hottest setting, just like the shower, and then dunks Meg's head in. Ruth comes down at this point and she's furious because Meg's eyes are all fucked up, and there is a serious risk that Meg could go permanently fucking blind, and Ruth just kind of explodes. She gets really pissed off at Eddie, and he stays away for just a little bit, and Ruth kind of takes better care of Meg for just a few days to help her heal from that, but it very quickly gets worse again. And this is, I don't know why, but this scene is what a lot of people talk about when they talk about how graphic The Girl Next Door is, which I don't really understand, because yes, this scene is awful, it's fucking awful, but there is another scene much later on which is far, far worse. To sum it up, Eddie comes back and Ruth isn't there again. Ruth is ill in bed. And Eddie ties Meg up, puts her on the ground, and then inserts a Coke bottle into her. They're so occupied with doing that they don't hear Ruth coming down, and Ruth goes completely fucking bonkers. And she starts screaming about how she never gets out, she never does anything, and she's screaming all this not at Eddie or Woofer or Willie or Donnie, she's screaming it at Meg, who's just lying there. And this is where I think it's most clear that Ruth is jealous of Meg somehow, even in this fucking state, even being violated like this, Ruth is jealous of Meg. But she also screams at the boys that Meg is dirty, that she has diseases, she has lice, and that's why they have to stay away from her. And yeah, and then to top it all off, Ruth then kicks Meg in the vagina twice. Next torture scene, Meg is strung up again, and Woofer is just kind of poking her with a knife. Enough to not let it bleed, but enough to make it hurt. And when he accidentally scratches her and does draw blood, Ruth walks up to her and cauterizes it with a cigarette. And this entire time, Ruth is really detached. She is obviously deteriorating, and she just doesn't really care anymore. And Meg is kind of shutting down. She's not responding to the torture besides, screaming. She's not saying anything. So David gets a chance alone with Meg, and he tells her that later tonight he's going to come down there because it's a small town and they trust each other, so no one really locks their doors. So he's able to get into their house. And he tells her that he's going to set her free, basically. He's going to untie her, he's going to leave her with some money, and he's going to set her free. And the next morning, he finds out that she didn't get out. Or she did get out, but she went back to save her sister, Susan, who's still... Obviously, she's not being as brutally abused as Meg is, but Susan is still being abused as hell. And obviously Meg cares a lot for her, so she tries to go back to Susan, and that's when she got caught. And that bit was just so fucking rough. Because you can see it. The worst part about this book is that you know how it ends. Because it ends the same way that the Likens case ends. It ends with Sylvia, it ends with Meg, dying. But there are so many times where it feels like it's about to end. Not Meg's life, but but the torture and the captivity. And each time, any hope you have is just completely smashed. It is a very hopeless book. And then next time David enters the house, Meg is being raped by Donnie. That's it. There's no more forbidden stuff anymore. Anything goes now, because again, Ruth just doesn't give a shit. So the next detail is pretty much taken directly from the Likens case. It's not the exact words, I don't remember the exact words, but Ruth and the boys take a sewing needle, heat it up over a candle. I think it's over a cigarette lighter actually, and then burn the words "I fuck me" onto Meg's chest. Which, it's just difficult to think about, because something very similar to that, again, I can't remember the actual words, happened to Sylvia Likens, and it is just fucking awful. So after that's happened, Ruth sort of taunts Meg with the fact that because she has those words burned onto her chest, no man is ever going to want her, because that is going to stay there for life. Which then makes Ruth consider another punishment, or as she sees it, a gift to Meg. The way she sees it, obviously no guy is going to want Meg, but Meg might still want them. So she asks the boys to get her a bunch of newspaper and put it in the sink in the basement, and then she gets a tire iron. And they hold Meg down, they tie her down, they spread her legs, and Ruth heats the tire iron over the flames. And chapter 42 is pretty blank, because David says, "I'm not going to tell you about this. I refuse to. There are things you know you'll die before telling, things you know you should have died before ever having seen. I watched and saw." That's the scene I was talking about when I said that I don't understand why people find the Coke bottle scene so egregious, and not this part, because that is probably one of the most horrifying things I've ever thought of. At this point, David is also being locked in the basement along with Meg and Susan, because they figured out that David is the one who allowed Meg to very temporarily escape. And Meg and Susan are just lying there in the dark, and Meg is very clearly close to death. She is completely out of it, and she keeps scratching at the scar that she has on her arm, and she keeps peeling it off, and Susan and David are just kind of watching her. David and Susan decide to try one last effort to escape from the basement, and they basically set a fire in the sink. similar to how the timeline was heated up. And that works in getting Ruth and all the boys down there, and they manage to take a few out with Susan's crutches, because remember, she's still physically disabled from the car accident that happened at the beginning of the plot, so she is pretty much helpless throughout this entire story. And it works for a second, and then it doesn't. David and Susan are held down by Ruth's sons, and then Ruth, who was obviously furious, takes Meg's head and just whacks it against the basement wall. And Meg doesn't die there, but she doesn't really wake up much in the next few hours. And then eventually, Meg dies. Which we all knew was coming. Again, it's the way that the Likens case ended. It is quite... I feel like the Likens case ends much, much more sadly. But... yeah. The police are brought to the house then. David's parents were worried about where he'd gone, so they phoned the police, and they somehow found out that he was, last at Ruth's house. And then, it's all over then. They find Meg, they find Susan, they find everything that's been happening. And Ruth is about to get arrested when David basically pushes her down the basement stairs, and she just fucking dies, which I thought was a little bit comical, but it works. It's fine. It's quite different to how the real case ended, but it's way more satisfying than how the real case ended, because Gertrude Banaszewski, who is the woman who orchestrated the torture and death of Sylvia Likens, was sent to a women's prison and then later fucking got off early because of good behaviour. It is ridiculous. So while the death of Ruth in this book is a little bit weirdly out of place and a little bit not comical, it's just kind of weird, I definitely prefer it over Ruth going to a women's prison and getting out early on good behaviour. It's a much more satisfying ending to a story. So that's The Girl Next Door. A horrible, horrible book that describes the suffering and death of a 14-year-old girl. And I think it is fucking fantastic. At risk of sounding like a complete psycho. This book is fantastically written. I'm never going to fucking read it again though, because it is just awful. I said before that I'd talk more about the ethics of using the Sylvia Likens case, and it's difficult. It's difficult to decide an opinion on because it's a complex subject. On one hand, history is history. Pretty much everyone involved with the death of Sylvia Likens is not dead, but they're not... Most people got punishment for what happened. It may have been too lax a punishment, but they did at least get punishment. And so there isn't much... It's not like Jack Ketchum was taking money away from the people who are affected by the crime. At the same time, obviously, there is issues with profiting off of horrific crime. At the heart of it, that's what a lot of true crime is doing. And true crime is not morally awful, but sometimes morally dubious. And I think that's a great way to describe this book. Not the contents of it, obviously, but the idea of it. It's not morally deplorable, but it is questionable. And it's important to think about what we're consuming and the context surrounding it. Overall, I'd give this book probably a 9 out of 10. I found the writing at points to be a little bit weird. I didn't talk about this much because I didn't really want to bring it up in an otherwise quite serious review, but Jack Ketchum describes breasts just a little bit too much. It's one of those things where if it's a female author, it's like, fine, but because it's a male author, you have to think, we're very horny. I don't think Jack Ketchum was horny for the violence and blood in this book, but just the way that he describes tits over and over again is fucking weird. Other than that, though, it's a good book. It's got good characters, it's got a good plot, and it left me with a horrible, horrible pit in my stomach, and I'll remember it until I die. Now that the review's over with, it's time for the last part of the video, which is picking out our next topic of review. So, I will just... Here we go. This is Exquisite Corpse. I'm really excited about that. I've heard some extremely good reviews. So if you want to follow along in this book club, then pick up Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright and read along with me. And I'll see you next week for our next review. Thank you so much for watching. I know it's cliche, but liking and commenting and obviously subscribing does really help my channel. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Have a good week.